All right. I think we are live. I'm going to imagine we are live. Welcome everyone to another episode of the OpenJS Foundation's Cross-Project Council meeting. Today is the 10th of May. I've got the link for the notes here for the recording. And we are rocking and rolling. I will drop the minutes in the chat again for folks. Looks like everybody's been good about adding themselves, so thank you. And even some announcement notes are developing. So great. Let's do that. Let's jump into announcements. I see Jory's back. Are you back, Jory?
Oh, I suppose we'll see. RCN internet is no good this month. So announcements. We have just a few short weeks remaining before OpenJS World. We have been very hard at work with our programming committee to finalize and polish and kind of move some things around to make different accommodations for speakers and that sort. If you would like to get involved, we would of course love to have you. And of course, if you are a project representative and you'd like to grab some time in our community theater space, we cordially invite you to do that. There's lots of room, and we'd love to have you. So that is one of the probably top priorities for us these days. I think before my internet completely failed on me, I was talking a little bit about the JS Landia Awards. We haven't quite had time to take a look at all of the awesome nominations that are in, so I'm going to send that link around to you all and give you just a tiny bit more time to nominate awesome people for the Pathfinder Awards and that sort of thing. So it's a great opportunity to recognize folks, and thank you all for your support and retweets too, just to help spread the word there. That is that. Oh, and then I also want to share that the Loopback is having their monthly maintainers meeting tomorrow. That's on the public calendar. And as a reminder, if your project has public meetings that would like to put on the OpenJS calendar, just let us know. We'd be happy to help surface that so you get more attendees to your project meetings. That's all that's coming to mind right at the minute. I don't think I'm missing anything, but I'll let Robin let me know if I am. Okay.
Yep.
I think that's good. Yeah.
We are a little less than a month out from the event, huh?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
Cool. Exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, with that note, let's get into the agenda. If someone can double check me on my comment here in the announcements, I think there's maybe something in there that's potentially still private. I'm going to jump into the first agenda item, which is welcoming Voltrek Master to the CPC as a regular member. Voltrex is not here. Let's see. Oh, there's a note. It's their honor, and they're happy to be involved. I will get back to their question. It actually looks like maybe Jordan already responded, so that's good. Thank you, Jordan. Maybe we'll see Voltrex Master in a future meeting, but there are plenty of ways to participate. So I'm happy that they are involved, and you can get involved too. Just get involved, and we'll be happy to have you. Cool. So I will close this issue after the meeting with a little note saying thanks, and we'll move on from there. The next agenda item is issue 874. This is CPC board seat term limits. Tierney created this last meeting 2 weeks ago, and I think it was born out of some comments on the primary board seat election. I don't know if there's anything we want to talk about with regards to this today, or if we want to have the conversation in the issue. But feel free to speak up, anyone, if you'd like to engage.
You're muted, Michael. I don't know if you're trying to.
Right. Yeah, I was. Thanks. I was going to say, I think it's worthwhile asking to see if there's any objections or concerns about like setting a 3-year term limit.
I don't have any objections. What does it, just for the sake of discussion, what does the term limit help with? And what does it hurt with? Just kind of thinking out loud here.
So the idea was, well, so I think the way this started is at some point it was discussed. Michael, do you want to discuss the early context of like why we had this conversation? I don't want to make public comments about things that I'm not sure.
I think I said last year that next year I wouldn't run again. And I think it was out of the context of that you thought, well, okay, maybe it's a good time to say that it's not a bad idea to switch up every so often. And that the term limit kind of, formalizes that like, hey, somebody's going to come in, they would be in for say 3 years. And then after that, we would be hoping that somebody else would come in. And I think the argument might be, and I'm not arguing one way or the other at this point, but just like the argument would be is that you want to have, different people get involved at different times. And this just kind of sends and sets a known end date versus, versus it just happening ad hoc. So Toby, I see your hand up, right?
Yeah, and I think Jordan maybe threw his up first. I don't know if you want to go first, Jordan.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think term limits are a fine mechanism to achieve the goal of like ensuring diversity in these positions, provided that there is a healthy pool of candidates.
Right, that was one of my comments, right? Like we shouldn't make it so that you can't if there's nobody else, right?
Right. That's all. As long as in the absence of candidates, nobody, like someone could continue until a candidate arrives, then like term limits sound fine and like there's no downsides.
Yeah, agreed.
Especially if we construct it and stagger it in such a way that there's like continuity as new people show up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like my reasoning was actually more around making sure that we didn't elect someone that did a year and then re-elected someone else in place of that person, just out of lack of ability to bring new people in, right? Like essentially my concern was, if someone's been spending a year getting to know what working on the board feels like, it is not good for the CPC for that person to be replaced too quickly, unless that person is not doing their job, right? And I think having, as was mentioned on the issue, having elections on a regular basis to make sure that we're still happy with that person's work is good. But I think on the other hand, it's not good for the CPC not to have continuity on the board. I think it's worthwhile for the community and the CPC to be represented on the board by people that know what's going on and that are able to be effective as board members and just not be there to learn for a year and then go away. So that was like my biggest concern was this one. And then sort of like as a result of making sure that we had people that stayed on for a long enough period of time to be effective, we also needed sort of like a funnel to get new people in. And so that sort of like implied, sort of as an effect of that to sort of like term limits. But for me, what I wanted was really make sure that folks that are there stay on long enough to be effective. And it seems like this mechanism kind of helps with both of those.
But a term limit would still mean you would be up for election every year?
Yeah, at least in my opinion, we still want the election every year, because I don't think we want like a 3-year term where that's just like too long. I think every year there should be an election, because most likely, I think what Toby says will happen. People are like, they seem to be doing a good job. They're engaged. It makes sense to continue versus switching every single time, right? But the term limit is more like, if there's multiple candidates, you would stay on for a reasonable amount of time. Like 3 years is a pretty long time. But then somebody else would have the opportunity, right? And maybe by having that fixed end date, there'd be less inclination to switch after the first year, if you know what I mean. Like, I don't know if that was what Toby was getting at, is that if there's a fixed end date, okay, we're going to let somebody run maybe for that 3 years if it makes sense, and then somebody else has an opportunity.
Look, I'm going to be very blunt and very concrete, so we can have a very concrete conversation about this. I've been interested about having a board position for a long time, and it felt ridiculous for me to compete against Sarah, that had just started being on the board. It felt like it would be completely counterproductive to do that, because that would have created a situation where if Michael was going, it would have been their 6. I mean, it was just ridiculous, right? And so, I wanted to sort of like solve the problem of not wanting to compete against someone that it wouldn't make sense for them to be there, essentially. And the pieces for me for that are I would go for 2-year terms personally, because I feel like 2 years on a board gives you a better sense of like learning and doing the work, right? But like we can debate the specifics, but essentially, like my goal was, it's good for people to come and be involved for a while, and then make sure that others, like I don't know what the word is, but like train others to like become have that. And so having a limit forces us as a collective to make sure that we have new folks that are willing to do this.
Yeah, 2 things come to mind for me, and they're kind of questions. One, I wonder about any sort of like shadowing and like mentoring a new board person. So for example, if there was a 3-year term limit in this last year, could someone shadow that board member and kind of be brought up to speed? And I don't know, it's just a thought that crossed my mind. And then the other thing is, should there be different requirements and such for the different board seats too? Is that something we would want to consider? Robin?
When I look at this meeting, I see 8 potential awesome board members. I think you bring your whole self and your unique experiences to the board seat. I don't think it's like you have to have a PhD in corporate, nonprofit governance. So I don't know if shadowing really makes sense. And so, I don't know if we're overthinking it a little bit. Term limits are interesting. I served on a nonprofit board for many years, and we did not for board seats, but it was for board leadership. We did 2 years for board leadership, and you would be, president-elect, president, and then post-president. So you're kind of still have that continuity a little bit. But again, I think there's so many great people who could serve. I do like the idea. I do think having folks in for a few, 2 or 3 years is great, or even longer if no one else is interested. But again, lots of great opportunities.
Emily?
Yeah, just wanted to check. I mean, I think effectively it feels a bit premature to be talking about this. Please, someone correct me if I'm right, but my recollection is that in the grand total history of the OpenJS Foundation and the CPC, we have had, I think, 3 people apply for board seat positions that we've had open.
Sounds about
or are
right.
there more than that? So I mean, it kind of feels like figuring out term limits in this situation would not serve the greater good of what we want to do, and it would a bit needlessly limit the options we have for selecting people for the board, because we honestly have not had, even of Robin, as you mentioned, the 8 great people that you see on this call, only a couple of us have ever applied for even the board positions. So it's a bit, yeah.
Well, and I'll just say really quickly and then let Toby chime in. It may be, and this may be like what Toby kind of described, that other people haven't stepped up because they thought, oh, well, we'll let that person do it, and then I'll maybe do it next time or sometime in the future. Go ahead, Toby.
Yeah, no, I just want to be clear here. One of my initial suggestion was, the way I brought this up was, I think that the CPC has to be more intentional about our position on the board. That's what I thought was important. So I actually don't necessarily think that elections are a good thing, right? Like for example, right? I think that what would be interesting is to figure out a strategy for the CPC to be effective board members and represent the community there. That was my intention. Like how we actually do that, like the mechanics of it. Like I think Emily's point is really good here. Like discussing like the specifics of the mechanics of it is not the most important thing. Like for me, the important thing is how can we be intentional, effective members in the board. And so that's essentially what I wanted to originally do.
Interesting. Based on, sorry, I'll let Emily go. Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, so one thing on that topic that comes to my mind is that we do have like a couple of board members, and I don't recall very many, if any, situations in which we as the CPC have heard from our own board members about, what they think of what's happening at the board level. Maybe hearing back more and having a more active conversation within the CPC might help us form stronger opinions about what our activities on the board ought to be, if any.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I don't think, that's, I wonder if we should carve out time in a CPC meeting, every other one or something, to discuss a bit more what's going on at the board. How do we as a group feel about it? What can we, are there ways that we should be getting involved, et cetera? Sarah?
I agree. I think that sounds like a great idea. One thing, I almost even wonder if it would be interesting for the CPC to see we have a public board meeting. It is on YouTube, but even just going through the slides in the CPC meeting. Or
sorry, your audio is really bad. I hope it's not.
Yeah.
Is it me or is it everyone?
I put these on backwards.
Yeah, that's better. Okay.
Yeah, so I was saying that it would be really cool to share more board content with the CPC, and I think it would be beneficial for the CPC in general to understand what's happening at the board level, so people can even make the decision of if it's interesting to them to run for the board. And another thing is that we put together slides for the CPC every board meeting, and I know that. Well, I speak for myself. I know I've probably missed things. So I even wonder if it could be, if those could be shared with the CPC before the board meeting, so we can make sure to include anything that we think are important. So I think that all of this sounds like a great idea, and happy to help facilitate however possible.
Great.
Yeah, I think the main question I'd have, and maybe Robin can help, is like, how much from the presentation, the overall presentation that goes to the board, could be shared?
Yeah.
Because that's where I think there's always the uncertainty, at least on my part, right? Like the financials, can we share those? I think no, but I could be wrong on that. And
Yeah, there's some programs that have heavy financial investments and decisions and endorsements that I would really love to have the CPC weigh in on, particularly going into 2023. And that's the training and certification program and our event. Those are big sort of budget lifts. I think the training and certification is swimming along nicely now, but or where do we want to make further investments? Those are all important things that you all should be informing for sure.
Yeah, and we can certainly do, some of this non-public, in a private session with just CPC members or something, and whatever
I'm
makes sense.
comfortable with that, with budget and things. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and we can do it as a part of the CPC meeting, or we can even, use one of the working sessions too, and just keep it non-streamed and whatnot.
Yeah, and I think that would definitely be good, because even like a lot of those things are not, it's not like the board micromanages those things, right? And most of those things, it's the, Robin and staff come and present, here's what the plan is. So if we can share those plan or get it, get input that influences that, I think that would be the way to go, right? Because by the time the board sees a lot of that, often it's the, yeah, okay, this is the execution that's being put in place versus, here's the nitty gritty.
Yeah. I don't know, on those programs, those two that I mentioned, I mean, the training and certification was in play with the Node Foundation for probably 3 years before I joined. So, but the events are sort of a yearly thing. And I do know when we signed a 3-year contract back in 2019, there was a discussion over several months from the board. Location is very important. And the budget, of course, is hugely important. So those are not those are not like one and done discussion votes from the board, for sure.
Yeah, so those are the kind of ones that definitely making it part of the process to make a decision to get input from the CPC would be good.
Yeah.
Like, I don't personally think it's the board member needs to be advocating, like when it gets to the board meeting, to say, wait a sec, we should have it somewhere else. I think it should be part of the, hey, we're planning the event, we should have the CPC's input so that we know when it gets to the board, it already has the CPC input on that front, right?
Totally agree, 100%.
Toby?
Yeah, very briefly. I mean, I like the tone of this conversation and where this is going, like much better than doing some nitty gritty and details around like how long people get to stay on the board. So I think we should do this and then revisit like doing nitty gritty stuff like in a year or like in 6 months or like once we know what this looks like, frankly. I think it's a much better way of solving that problem. So thank you very much for bringing it up.
Do we, I don't, want to do this just to do this, but should we create an issue that kind of outlines what we're thinking here, and or just what are next steps, I guess?
Good next step would be after the next election, the 2 CPC board members could get together and kind of think about the how to, because I think as CPC representatives, the idea is to speak on behalf of the CPC, but I really think that they're making sure the CPC is kind of involved in some of these decisions for as much as we can, share would be great. So maybe that could be the issue, like an open issue to be revisited after the next election, of working together to figure out how best to do that. Because if we make a decision, like if we're about to have an election, making a decision now kind of doesn't make any sense.
Okay. Toby, do you have your hand up, or is that residual?
No, yeah, I do. Just, it would be great if you all could give some, like a feedback of what's going on, or like, so maybe just have like a time, maybe book it, add to you like the the regular agenda a block of time like we have for deciding what's going to happen, to talk about what's going on. Like, do something like that already, start the ball rolling. I think that would be great. So specifically, like in our agenda, maybe like every other week or every month or something like that. I think that would be good stuff too. I think there was something like that at some point. Well, there is.
There is board meeting updates is yeah, after announcements.
Well, it's like, do it more seriously then, or more, or more thoroughly. I don't want to dismiss the work that's been done. Just to be clear, right?
I think more thoroughly. That's I think
Yeah.
that's a fair piece of feedback. Yeah.
But I think in my mind, like the real shift where you're going to get a benefit is shifting it so that the things that go to the board already have the CPC input up front. Like it shouldn't, by the time that it gets to the board meeting, the only question should be, did we already get the CPC input on this?
Yeah. Agreed.
Right. And if the answer is no, then the board, you know, the board representatives could say, well, wait a sec, we should have input from the CPC and we've agreed that we will, right? Like, and I think, you know, Robin, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Like, I don't, you want to, it's where the things that are being presented there, where they need and want input, because the board isn't like managing the work, right? Like, so it's not like the board is telling the, you know, go out and do this, this, and this. So I think that it should be part of the process that leads up to the discussion at the board.
We do have a plan. We have a plan with tactics, you know, goals, strategies, tactics, and metrics that we work against. So that is iterated on with the board, and we're going on sort of the third year as well. So thanks, Toby.
Thanks, Toby.
Yeah.
Right. So sharing
yeah.
that with the CPC and getting the input in advance of the board meeting, or to get, you know, if you get the groups together, that would be fine. But I think like getting that input in advance would make sense, right?
Yeah, and hoping that you and, you know, Sarah provide that input as well. So.
Yeah, and I'm imagining, and then I'll let Emily and Jory go, being more intentional about asking about the board before we start the meeting, and board updates once we hit streaming, you know, and if we decide before we hit streaming that there is board stuff we need to talk about, then we can save some private time. But I guess my point being more intentional about the board sort of.
Agreed.
Emily?
I was going to say what pretty much you just said. The way I would phrase it is that we explicitly move in the agenda the board meeting updates for now to be a part of the private session of each meeting, so that it can cover possibly more ground. And if there's news from the board that ought to be said in public, that kind of sounds like announcements and would fit in there. The bigger changes that Michael was suggesting sound an awful lot like the sorts of changes that ought to get further discussed, especially once the elections are over for the positions.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm really trying to make the point that I think that involved like pulling the CPC. If you're trying to push all the interaction as a proxy through the directors, you know, basically the director hears something in the board meeting, brings that back to the CPC, and then says, okay, you know, what is everybody's opinions, and then pulls up and then goes back, waits to the next board meeting, which is a month later, and shares that. That's going to be much more cumbersome. So if we take a concrete example, the location for the next event, right? It shouldn't be that, you know, there's a discussion in the board meeting that says where should we have the next event. You know, it's probably that in advance of that, it would have been good for a question to go to the CPC and say, well, where does everybody think the event should have been, right?
Michael, I think that probably discussion would probably be happening in our program committee meeting before we take it to the CPC. They've been involved in sort of every step of the way. So, and I'm happy to use a working session as well to go through the goals and metrics. I think I've shared them with some of you folks in the past. It's really yeah, open book there. We share, I've shared them with the rest of the executive directors at the LF too, so.
Yeah, I think Michael's point maybe is just that basing it around the monthly meetings might just be really long, and we probably need more proactive engagement to some extent.
Right, that cycle time is like, a
Yeah.
month.
Yeah. And
I think what I'm trying to get is I don't think we have a lot of surprises monthly. It's not, I don't think things are getting sprung on the board monthly that are
Right.
new, is my point. And Jory actually has had her hand up for a
Yeah,
little bit. That's
yeah.
her. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that I think what I'm really hearing is a couple of things. One is that frankly this process of information management from the CPC to the board, which I think frankly the intention of these community board representative seats is to facilitate and make sure that that communication process is happening. It may very well be that frankly that's a larger lift than sometimes we have time for, and so it's kind of easier to say, oh well, I didn't quite double check what I could or couldn't share with this group of people this month, so no real updates, or dang, I didn't quite have the time I needed to gather the different things that are happening on the CPC level for the board. So maybe Jory or Brian kind of from time to time fill out those slides for the CPC. It takes time. It's hard work. It's not something you can just sort of passively do in a few minutes. And so one thing that I want to acknowledge is how much time that does take from folks like Michael and Sarah, and thank you for doing that. But it's it's also clear that perhaps it's not always enough time to get everything communicated out, and that is very important to sort of building that out, because to Robin's point, nothing that we do is new or surprising or anything like that. We start having these conversations about where should we have the next event, with the folks in our programming committee who've demonstrated that they care about getting involved with events. So it makes sense that those conversations start with them and then they flow out from there. And we try very hard to make sure that when things do get rolled up into, say, a strategic package, like the standards working group did with their sort of strategic ideas for how they would engage the standards community, that does get shared with the CPC and with the board in a way that, again, solicits feedback from ideas or projects or programs that start with a smaller group, because that's how those ideas grow into something that we can execute on.
Yeah.
So so that I think that's a long-winded way of saying, perhaps what we need to do is just have a bit more time and a bit more grace extended to the folks who are attempting to facilitate these conversations, and just do what we can to support. In particular, I'm thinking here right now of Michael and Sarah to help make sure they, feel comfortable sharing things back to the CPC, feel comfortable asking for time to have those private conversations if there's something that they want to get quieter feedback on and things like that. But that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be good. And I mean, I guess in the board meetings, we could, it's if things were tagged to be, well, this is shareable privately, right? Then that might tag things which are yeah, okay, we think we should be shared. I think it's back to, what Robin says. A lot of things are not a surprise, right? It's not there's all sorts of, if we went back and looked at the agendas look pretty similar, time to time. And there's things updates on members that Robin's talking to in terms of who you're working with to try and get to join the foundation, right?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, is that something we should share, when they're in advance, or which of those things on the last agenda? So maybe we could sit down with Robin and look at the last agenda and say what was here that we should have shared. But
yeah, and I think too, there's a difference maybe. Sorry, Michael, to cut you off. I was going to say between public and between sort of our private too, which I wonder about. Emily, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there is the question of it being slightly challenging currently within the board to define whether something can be said with the CPC or not. Could it be possible to just as a practice of defaulting to assuming that anything handled at the board can be shared with the CPC in private, and things that are not of that category to need to be flagged explicitly, so to default the other way?
Yeah.
Guess that would be a question for the board, right? Because currently I think it's the opposite. Everything is assumed to be private unless we specifically say, like, I know there's been a number of times where I'm like, is it okay if I share this with the CPC to get more input, or share it with the TSC or whatever? And certainly I feel like we need to ask that, like, anything discussed among the board members is considered to be among that group unless otherwise agreed.
I wonder, I'll say real quickly before letting Sarah speak, is, should there be, I don't want to say rules, but like, we don't talk about this, we do, or at least specifically things that shouldn't be talked about privately with the CPC. What's the criteria for something being private to the CPC even? Might be interesting to understand. Sarah?
Yeah, I wonder if an easy way to do this would be to start with the public deck and then just confer around if there's anything we think from the private session that is important to share with the CPC, or because I think even the public deck and info is beneficial to just the stuff that we're talking about, thinking about, and learning about. So that might make it easier for the folks involved. Just a quick sync up afterwards to see if any private stuff would be helpful to get input on.
Yeah, great.
Certainly, like, one thought would be just send the public deck to the CPC mailing list after the board meeting, and then, put that link to that on the agenda for the next meeting, right?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yep.
That's certainly a step we could take. It sounds good to me.
Those are all things obviously anybody can go see, but actually having them, not having to go look for them, can be beneficial, right?
I say we could perhaps link them in the YouTube video as well. So the deck, public deck.
Sure.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. Great. I think this was a good conversation. I was mindful of the agenda and wanted to just let it play out. So I appreciate everybody's thoughtful comments. Seems like we've got some good ideas. And I will, like I said before, we'll be more intentional about bringing up the board updates and whatnot in these meetings. Cool. So if we want to call it a wrap on that, we can kind of quickly go through the agenda. I think, there's not a lot here that we need to get too deep in, but we'll go through it real quickly. Cool. With that in mind, the next one is issue 859, the board seat election, which I think we can close now because, the election has happened. And I think that the comments that were here were captured in Toby's other issue.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that one's closable.
Yeah.
I think we can close it.
Great. Okay. This one being pull request 851, update contributor covenant code of conduct to B2.1. I don't know if we're going to get into this at all today. Anybody?
We were, I think at the last CPC, we said we were going to have a working session on it, and then last week we were all gone. So I think the action is to have a working session on it.
Okay, should we do next working session? And if so, do we need to make sure that we get the engaged parties in the session?
I will double check right now if there's anything.
Next week.
Next week, it is May the 17th. So we do not have anything for the 17th. So we could do that for our next working meeting.
My only comment there is, I think next week is at KubeCon EU. and will that prevent anyone important to the conversation from attending?
I'll be there, but I think I'm traveling that day, but I arrive early enough that I can participate that Tuesday evening, I believe.
Okay. I think it wouldn't be bad if we had a conversation somewhere in Slack about who's been engaged and who we should reach out to and make sure they join, and also maybe even something of an agenda. What's the order of things we want to tackle? Because I know there's this issue. I think there's another issue or pull request open, somewhat related. I think we should just be very intentional about making the most of that session. The working session is always the same time as the previous session. So next week's working session will be at this time next week. Cool. So maybe Robin, Jory, maybe we can just have a Slack chat or something. I don't know if anybody else wants to be involved in terms of planning for the working session, but that would probably be helpful.
Sure.
Great, thank you. And then just kind of kicking off these last three, I'm gonna get, I know I keep saying this, but open up that collab space soon on security. It's really important, but I just have been swamped in a variety of ways. So I will commit to getting that open before the next session, next CPC meeting. We're skipping the license check this week, that issue. And no update on the COC violation, which is the other clarify requirements around COC violation. That's the other issue I was thinking of. So we will maybe pull some of those things into the next working session and go from there. So that's it for the official agenda. Anything else that we want to touch on with the last 6 minutes, 5-6 minutes? If not, we can call it a wrap. I think it was a great conversation today. I was happy to talk.
One quick question. I forget the timing, so asking now. When do we need to start the election for the non-impact voting members?
Yeah, that's a good question, and also reminds me of a question that I had forgotten about, which is the CPC chairperson election, which we also need to do. I'm trying, where am I going? I'm looking for the important dates and reminders so I can get these specifics, dates and reminders file.
I think June, end of June is when your seat is up, and July is when Michael's seat is up.
So the chair election, the CPC chair term ends April 30th.
Oh.
Yeah. And then ending July 31st is the Director 2, CPC impact voting member selection, and CPC non-impact voting member election. All three of those things happen at the end of July, so we should probably start at the beginning of July, I guess, or late June. And we had planned it that way so that it would be that we could recruit and kind of promote this at the event, and then have those three elections and selections happen after OpenJS World. You catch that, Emily?
Yep, got it. Thanks.
Yeah. I think last time we talked about this, Jory, and I know you probably have a lot on your plate, but I think one of us should open up a chairperson election.
Yeah, but I for some reason, and I may have just misremembered, that we did a call and you were unopposed, and so that was that. But maybe that was last year.
Or it just happened with Sarah, but yeah, it could have. And my brain is so mush right now from everything going on. It could have happened. I really.
It happened last year for Joe.
Okay.
Thank you, Emily. I was
time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, exactly.
so yeah, happy to open up another call for nominations for CPC chair as an issue, as we've done in the past. I just I guess yes, time flies. Time does indeed fly.
Time does indeed fly. I'm gonna share this issue here. I'll put it in the Zoom chat, but this is the issue that I had for adding missing dates, and I only share it because there's a link. I guess I should just share directly to the link of the last election for the chairperson, if it's at all helpful. I can share it via Slack, Jory, if that's helpful. And it looks like I opened it last time, so whatever's fine.
Okey doke, I got it.
Okay, great. Cool. Anything else before we say our goodbyes? If not, thanks everybody for watching the live stream, and thanks everybody for joining. Appreciate all of you being a part of this, and I will see you around the water cooler.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
So-
Bye.